Hi guys, this is Carissa and welcome back to 12 Days of Creative Christmas on my YouTube channel, Inky Fairy Designs. This is day 2 and we're going to be making this cute card using so many techniques of stamping and coloring. So I started by using this detail ink by Brutus Monroe to do my stamping, and I am working on watercolor card watercolor paper. It is a cold press, so there is a ton of texture. It's 140 pound, and I'll have the exact brand. It's a new watercolor paper, Legion I think is the brand that I am using. And this stamp came from the Simon Says Stamp December card kit. And I don't normally purchase their card kits, but this stamp in particular was way too cute for me to pass up, and I just had to have this cute little Santa. And there's tons of little scene stamps in it. It's a huge stamp set, and I decided to use the Santa with the little sign pole that's there, and I did do multiple stamping because of the texture on this cardstock. And that's the great thing about having a MISTI or some type of tool like that. You can stamp multiple times and get a clear image on this cold press paper. So I'm using a variety of Distress Oxides. Now, the reason I decided to watercolor this stamp with the Distress Oxides was because the kit came with one called Festive Berries, and I thought it would be great to stamp his little Santa outfit in that Festive Berries color. So I pulled out some more of the Oxide inks and started coloring the image with them. So you can see I just smushed a little color onto my mat here. This is covered. It's like laminated, so it's great for kind of just smushing the ink right next to me and using it as a palette. So here's the Festive Berries color, and I'm coloring his little suit. This is where I realized that I don't know if it's the paper or if it's the inks or if it's a combination of both and me, but it was not easy to move the ink when I put it on dry. So if I came in and was trying to do like the dry or wet on dry coloring technique that I like to do with watercolors on my stamped images, it was just hard to move that ink around. So I ended up switching to more of a wet on wet, where I would wet the paper before bringing in the color, and I found that it would move a lot easier that way. But still, it was not the easiest coloring. And as I got started and as I was continuing, I was thinking to myself, what did I just get myself into? But I was already committed and wanted to see this through. So I just added more color where I wanted it. And I used that same Festive Berries to give him some rosy cheeks, a little rosy nose, and color in his mouth. I also used that same color to kind of do a candy cane pole for the signs. And then I come in with the black soot, and I'm using that to kind of give a little bit of shading for all of the white areas on his hat and his beard. And you can see really right here where I add a line. I didn't wet the paper beforehand, and I couldn't get that line to move. So then I just add more water to the rest of his beard, and then I can drop in the color, and it moved a lot more, and I was much happier with that. So I color his boots black. I don't try to do any shading. It's such a small area. I just wanted his boots to be black. And then I add a little bit of shading to the little cuff on his Santa suit, just to give it some dimension. And then I also do the same thing on the candy cane. I don't want that to be stark white. I want to have a little bit of shading there, even though I do want it to read white by the end of all the coloring. So I just give it a light shading. So I come in with Lucky Clover, and I color in his mittens with that, and then I'll start coloring the signs with that same color. So I try to use colors throughout the image just so that it ties everything together, and also so I'm not using a ton of colors on the image. And I end up doing the signs in, or like 2 of the signs in green, and then I bring in some of the brown colors that I used on the paper that he's holding, you know, his list of naughty and nice. I used those same colors on the sign in the middle, and those colors were frayed burlap, vintage photo, and antique linen, which I used antique linen and vintage photo also on his skin. So that's another way to tie everything together. The stamp set that I used is called Christmas Cheer, and I honestly don't know. I didn't even look at their site if it's sold separately. If it is, I'll have it in the description box below, where I also have a list of all of the supplies that I use in this video today, as always. So I'm just going to finish up a little bit of details here. I'm adding a little bit of texture onto the hat to kind of make it look fluffy. And you can kind of see here where I'm at with the coloring. Now the red was reading really flat to me. It didn't have a lot of dimension. So using the opposite color usually will give you a nice contrast or a nice shadow color. And so I brought in that Lucky Clover green and added that to a few of the areas on the Santa suit, and also on the signpost. And then I tried to use red to do the same thing on his mittens, but it was not reading as much of a shadow as just red on top of the green. So I ended up bringing black soot and adding some shading to his mittens and the signs where it's green. I also realized that this Distress ink really didn't lift well on this paper. So here I am. I decided to emboss all of the snowflakes that were in the stamp set to do my background. And at this point I was done with the Distress Oxides. I didn't want to do this big background you know, with the Distress Oxides because I was having such a hard time moving them. And even though I'm wetting my entire paper, I just rather go in with my Daniel Smith watercolors. So for the entire sky background, I am using some various Daniel Smith colors from my palette that I mentioned yesterday. I do not know the colors. I really do need to swatch this palette so I can be a little bit better at telling you what colors I'm using when I'm using them. But I'll try to look at it and figure it out for the description below. Otherwise, I'll just list Daniel Smith, some Daniel Smith paints that are similar in my product description. So I'm just adding that. I love the embossing on the background. I embossed it in some white embossing powder. And I like how as I'm adding color, you can see those snowflakes coming to life. So I started with a blue, and now I'm bringing in some of my favorite purples onto the top, starting with Moon Glow and then Imperial Purple. And I still had this left over from my yesterday's project. So I ended up using this again, adding some teal to it, adding some of that wisteria, and using that same technique where I mix it with the Chinese white and kind of add some more texture and interest to the background. So for the bottom, I was really having a hard time. As you can see, I used multiple colors. I started with this wisteria and like a purple, and I thought, you know, that might read as snow, but I didn't like it at all. So I bring in a shadow color and try to kind of give it a little bit of a distinction from the blues and purples that I have in the sky already. Because normally if I'm coloring snow, it would be a blue or a purple, and I was like, well, now I have blue and purple in the sky. What am I going to do with the ground? So I mix some of that shadow color with the white again and just kind of drop it in on the bottom, and it worked for the meantime. I end up coming back and fixing it once it's all dry, which I'll show you what I do at that point. So now I'm using that same technique. I'm mixing the white with some of these yellows and greens, and I thought it would look like the Aurora, I always say that, Borealis, or the, you know, that you know what I'm talking about, right? I can't think of the name, but I was just trying to add a little bit more interest into the sky, so I darken up the top of it and the sides with some more of the moon glow and imperial purple, and I'm just dropping in colors here and there until I'm happy with the way that the sky looks, and I end up letting it dry overnight. There was a couple of reasons why I did that. One, I have those snowflakes embossed in the background, and I didn't want to reactivate the embossing powder and lose any of that detail, and or like heat set the watercolor into those embossed areas. So letting it dry overnight, you can see it allows the colors to move and blend together on their own, and I don't lose any of the details of the snowflakes when if I wanted to heat set it. But you could definitely, if that's something that you want to do, you could lightly heat set it and just kind of not leave your heat tool on any length of time around those snowflakes. I love how his little paper turned out using the Oxide inks for coloring. That was a really nice, pleasant surprise. So I'm going to take my VersaFine Onyx Black ink and stamp my sentiments on the signs, and I'm going to emboss them just so it gives it a little bit more detail. I'm going to use this clear detail ink by Simon Says Stamp, and I like to do that whenever I emboss in black. I don't think I even have black embossing powder, but it can get quite messy if it doesn't wipe off on, you know, certain areas, even though I do prep my paper and it's completely dry. But this way, if any of that clear embossing powder gets anywhere else, you don't even notice it with such like a busy background that I have. So and then the VersaFine Onyx Black ink, it stays pretty wet, and you can emboss using it, and it gives you a really nice clear detail, especially for the sentiments that are tiny and kind of detailed like this. But I love that there's a variety of different sentiments in this stamp set that you can fit perfectly in the sign, and it just worked out really great. So here's where I came in the next day, and I didn't like that my Santa didn't look grounded as I would have wished. So I put out some of that black onyx ink, and I'm going to give him quite a bit of shadow underneath him. So I'm just kind of adding that on there, and then I clean my brush off and water it and move it around a little bit better. And I try, this is something that I'm really not good at, but I'm gonna try to get better at, is adding these like little cute little drop shadows that follow the shape of the stamped image that I'm using. So I kind of gave it a little bit of a wave to simulate, or you know, do the shadow of that list that he's holding. And then I decided I wanted more texture in his beard, so I come in very lightly with a light color, a very wet brush, and add just, you know, some swirls for what would be the curls of his beard. And then I think the last thing that I do while I have this black soot out on the table is I take a really small detail brush, I think it's a 0, and I add some squiggly lines to the list, so it looks like there's some names on there that he's taking a look at. But apparently before I did that, I went in with my Ink of Stella, or Wink of Stella, gold glitter pen, and there was just like an outline of the sign that I never filled in, so I added the gold there. And then I also added the gold to his belt, again just to tie it together so there wasn't just one area with that gold. So here I am coming in, I'm just using that black, and I'm trying to figure out what would be the front of the list that he's holding. And now that I think about it, I think I did it backwards, but it's a stamp, right? We get it. It's just giving us that illusion. So I cut down my paper. It was a 5x7 watercolor paper, and I cut it down to just under 4.5 by 5, or 4.25 by 5.5, so it would fit a standard A2 card base. In hindsight, if I had thought of it beforehand, I would have done that first if I knew that that's what I wanted to do. But I just put some dimensional adhesive on the back. That kind of hides any warping or anything from all of that water on the paper, and it just adds a little bit of dimension to the whole card. So I wanted to add more snow to the background. I tried using different white pens. I cut that out because it just wasn't working. So I decided to bring out my Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White ink and a fan brush by Princeton, and I put a little bit, it poured out really a lot onto a stamp block, and then I couldn't find a spray bottle, so I used some shimmer spray, and I just wanted to make sure, so I tested that on a piece of paper. I wanted to make sure that would work, and this added the snow look that I really wanted. I love that this P.H. Martin is like the bleed proof ink. I use it for lettering, but I forget that it's such a great thing to use for these winter cards to create this kind of snow. And this was the Glimmer Mist that I used, the Dazzling Diamonds. I didn't really notice a lot of shimmer because the watercolor that I used already had a lot of shimmer into it. But yeah, I couldn't find the water on my desk, and it was just handy right there. So that's what I used to mix it and make it a little bit more watery. So this is day 2 of the Creative Christmas, 12 days of Creative Christmas. I hope you enjoyed this card and all of these techniques kind of combined into one. I definitely will probably use this stamp again during the series because I think it's just so cute, and I hope you're enjoying it. I'd love to hear in the comments what you guys are creating for Christmas, or if there's anything that you'd like to see in this series. I will put up a link here to some more watercolor videos that you might enjoy, and I'd love it if you would click on my picture here and subscribe to my channel. And if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. That lets me know that you guys are enjoying this. So I'll see you back here tomorrow. Until then, stay inspired, be creative, and share that with others. Bye.